So welcome everyone to the panel discussion, Research Software, Career Paths and Training Needs. Our chair today is Marion Weinzierl, and this event is part of the SSI Research Software Camp, Next Steps in Coding, which started today and it's running until the 27th of May, which is next Friday. We have several sessions, workshops, and as well some content being published on our website. So keep an eye on our social channels. I'll hand over to Marion.
Hello, and thank you very much for inviting me to chair this panel. I think this is a very, very important topic and something that has been basically discussed since the foundation of the RSE movement, from how to get funding and so on to the career ladder discussions that we are having at the moment. And I think the importance of training RSEs, of not just harvesting the wild-grown RSEs, but actually cultivating the RSE skills, if you will, has been coming up recently a lot. So, for example, with the EPSSC RSE development grants that have been awarded recently, and also the discussions about actually study programs that we are having at several universities at the moment. So I'm very much looking forward to exploring this topic further today. And I would like to start with letting the panel introduce themselves. I'll go through the list as it was on the website. I think it's alphabetically by the first name. So let's start with Anne. Would you like to introduce yourself with some sentences?
Hi, everyone. My name is Anne Steele. I'm the community manager of the Turing Way, which is a community-led guide to reproducible, open, inclusive, and ethical data science. I admit I'm a little maybe out of the norm in this group here, and I'm really excited to learn from the rest of the panel, as I'm actually an anthropologist by training and have a background in ethnography and data journalism, as I said in my video. And I'm really keen to talk a bit more about, these challenges of institutional recognition, as well as career progression, that we definitely see the same sort of questions being asked within the community management space, as well as the code switching kind of required to work between different types of disciplines and different types of expertise. But I'm also really keen also to talk about not only the development of RSE roles, but also the kind of broadening field of research infrastructure roles, which are in many ways the kind of suite of roles surrounding research that are very much kind of opportunities for you as well. So happy to chat about that more here, and keen to learn from the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Anne. Next on my list is Gabriella.
Hi, everyone. So Gabriella Rustici. I am a senior director in a department called Data Science and Artificial Intelligence at AstraZeneca. And I run an in-house educational program called Data Science Academy that aims at upskilling our R&D, and we target really all roles from research scientists, like you're familiar with in academic settings, all the way to individuals that are in more technical roles. So interesting contributing, although please, I have been in industry only for 2 years, so do not consider me as the industry expert. I come from an academic background, so be kind.
Thank you. Joanna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks. Yes, thank you for having me. So my name's Jo. I work at the UK Astronomy Technology Centre in Edinburgh at the Royal Observatory, where I'm working on a telescope design study. So developing the concept for a new telescope, and that involves a whole range of different kinds of expertise. My job is largely working on the science cases, so working with scientists and researchers around the world, and developing software for them, so a sensitivity calculator. I don't think I realized I was an RSE until I had some chats with people that's the job that I'm in, and I'm really interested to learn more from the others on this panel as well, and particularly roots into this kind of work.
Thank you, Jo. Jonathan.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Cooper. I lead the Research Software Development Group at University College London in our Centre for Advanced Research Computing. We're a group of around about 35 and constantly growing, both data scientists and research software engineers. And the first group in the UK, one of the largest, and doing quite a bit of work on career pathways in this space as well.
Thank you, Jonathan. Next is Mark.
Hi everyone, my name is Mark and I run the Artificial Intelligence and Informatics theme at the Rosalind Franklin Institute, which is a new institute in south of Oxfordshire on the Harwell campus. So I guess I probably have been at RSE since I pretty much started my academic career at my PhD level, although I didn't realise it at that point, which was a few years ago. And I became one of the SSI Fellows in 2014. Ever since then, I've been super interested in what the SSI has been doing. Now that I lead my own group, it's only a smallish group of 11 people, but one of the key things that I'm interested in is how we develop the skills within that group and make the most out of the team, and hopefully put us on a kind of a level footing with the other sort of academic research groups and themes that are in the Franklin and hopefully the wider area as well.
Great, thank you very much. Sarah is next.
Hello, my name's Sarah Jaffa. I am a research software engineer at University College London. So Jonathan there, depending on your screen layout, is my boss. I have been in this job about 9 months. My background is in astronomy research. So yeah, I'm really interested in how it feels to be a new RSE and possibly how we can make the transition for people moving into RSE a bit easier.
Thank you. And finally, Simon.
Hello, I'm Simon Hettrick. I'm the Deputy Director of the Software Sustainability Institute and one of the directors of the Southampton Research Software Group, which is a group of RSEs. Back in 2013, I led the SSI's campaign to recognise RSE, so I've been there right since the start and seen an awful lot of changes over the last decade. And the thing that keeps me up at night still is what happens when we run out of RSEs because they are wild grown and not formed. And that's what I'd like to discuss today.
Great, thank you very much. I think that's everyone. Tell me if I missed someone. No, okay, good. So let's start with the first question. What are the core skills that an RSE training or degree curriculum would need to teach, and how would it be different from software engineering courses taught at universities and colleges today? Mark, would you like to start on that topic?
Yeah, I can do. So when I was thinking about this question, I think one of the key things for me is the research element. So when I see RSEs at the moment, most of them have come from an academic background and they really understand the research element of the work that they're doing, which means when they're working with sort of the researchers that there is an critical part of what we do, they understand the highs and the lows and why they're coming at this from a slightly funny perspective and why they don't have all the spec that you'd want them to have at the beginning. So that would be the key element for me, would be a reasonable portion of the course to involve a research element so that you actually understand those principles, essentially effectively the bits you learn in a PhD about how research doesn't always go well and these kinds of things.
Thank you. Sarah, would you like to add something from the new RSE perspective?
Yes, so there's definitely a lot of learning involved in this job. I think coming from that research background definitely gives an advantage. If we're comparing it to a software engineering degree, I think there's a lot in terms of understanding your audience, that our audience is all academics. But there are other things that software developers might not be taught as much, such as you're not just talking to academics, you're talking to people who are not trained in coding. So communicating at a very different level, being able to explain the fairly high level coding that we might need to do or might need to get input on to someone who is not a trained coder, might only know one or no programming languages, and how to really communicate what we need for the project and what they need for the project in terms that they will understand, which I think a lot of software developers are used to being in an environment full of other software developers, which is very different.
Yeah, thank you. I see Gabriella is agreeing here. Joe, do you have something to add to this one?
I think also coming from recently fresh out of an astronomy department PhD system, I think one thing that would be key is to understand good practices for working with other people on software. That a lot of academic research can be quite a solo activity. And if you are, working on software or any kind of programming, you might be doing that by yourself. In which case you can develop a lot of bad habits and get away with a lot of shortcuts. So I think learning good practice for sharing code and working collaboratively, good version control, starting simple, these kinds of things are often not taught through the academic route, but need to be formalized well to have both that research understanding and be able to work with other people.
Yeah, thank you. Gabriella, I would like to direct the next question first to you. Are there any intermediate skills or specific specializations for Rsds that are particularly rare or thought after either in industry or in academia?
It's a very interesting question, and I'm not even sure if I have, all the knowledge to be able to answer it, but kind of to anchor to what has been just said, not just Rses, but data scientists, everyone that is in a very technical role. I think the challenge that they really face, and I see this definitely within the company, it's the fact that you have to work collaboratively and engage non-technical experts. So that interaction between the technical and non-technical, between the RSE and the scientists and the researcher, I think that is definitely an area where we need to do a lot of work. Now we're launching program internally, and we call it translators training. So really help people to collaborate and communicate effectively. So is it a matter of that we don't speak the same language? Is it a matter that we need to understand the technicality of research? Is it a matter of, so how do we as RSE in this case, effectively engage a non-technical audience? I think this is not necessarily a skill that is commonly found, not just in RSEs, but in any of us, because of the way, anchoring to what Joe was saying, the nature of traditional university degrees. When my previous role at the University of Cambridge, we established, a bioinformatics course for second year undergrads. And, you really see that it's still the way that we are taught is to think in a very individualistic way. So the idea of collaborating, sharing code, doing something in a collaborative fashion, it's also not something that we're naturally trained. So I think perhaps, maybe interesting also hear what Sarah has to say. When people join the company now, we are trying to get them to the same level in terms of a basic understanding of, how do we work collaboratively? How do you do version controlling internally? What are the peculiarities of our environment that you need to know in order to hit the road running? And I think that translation training will become very important and progressively more important as, the boundaries kind of become more blurry, and we really have to be effective in the way that we collaborate.
Thank you. Does any one of the others have to add something to this, or have you seen some specialization or so that was thought after? Mark, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, it's just a really quick one. I think you're completely right. Those sorts of skills are critical. The other one I'd say, especially if you're an RSE, you're often working on lots of small projects, and project management is super important, especially the ability to predict times, because you almost certainly will underestimate the amount of time every single project takes. And so you then tell 20 people that you'll be able to achieve each of their things in 1 week. And 5 years later, you haven't done any of them, and you've just got a load of really grumpy people. So that ability to sort of be able to estimate and double all your estimates and then double them again is quite something that's learned. Yeah, expectation management, perfect. Exactly that. That I'd say is the big skill to learn, or it's really useful. Many people don't have that.
Yeah, I agree. And did you have your hand up as well?
It's really interesting to hear from the panel here, because I almost feel like there's a kind of Venn diagram between scientific community managers and resource software engineers. We're very much, for example, within the Alan Turing Institute that incubates the Turing Way. We have kind of an internal team of community managers most of which are actually working on kind of collaborative scientific projects. So I'm thinking of AI for science and government. There's a community manager that's working to develop a kind of shared set of white papers, as well in the early detection of neurodegenerative diseases initiative called EDON, where again, we have someone who very much has a kind of scientific background, research background, but is working with a kind of team of researchers to one, create a kind of set of best practices, but also very much, sharing information on GitHub, like creating a shared and open workflow, where very much I think that kind of overlaps with the work of Rsdes and in many ways provides another opportunity for kind of, I guess, solidification or institutionalization of that role, and really emphasizing its importance in making collaboration possible.
Okay, I'm just seeing that there is one question on Slido that I will take now, because that feeds kind of in to what we were just discussing. So does it make sense to focus on newly minted PhDs from any field as an input to the RSE pipeline, meaning we are offering an RSE with transition training as career pathway? Does anyone want to say something, Simon?
So I think historically we have focused on PhD students as the sort of the new disenfranchised PhD students. That's the best place to pick up Rsdes. They've spent their lives developing software for research, and they realize actually they much prefer doing the software part of it in a research context than they want to follow a traditional research pathway. But the problem there is that's really reducing your numbers down, because waiting for people to get to the end of a PhD and don't want to follow a traditional research pathway. So I think we should focus on that group, but I would also like to be focusing a bit earlier, especially after masters. I think that'd be a really interesting thing, and I'd like to see, and there's a lot of talk about having a master's in RSE. I think that would be another brilliant place to draw people from, because you don't have to spend 3 or 4 years doing research to understand the research community. Just doing a year of masters is enough, I would say.
Yeah, and I've got brilliant colleagues from industry as well who never did the PhD. Jonathan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo Simon's point and say that's something that we're looking to go into with the UCL group in our next recruitment round. Should be able to attract people all the way from actually a bachelor's degree or particularly masters, not just those with a PhD or equivalent industry experience, which is where we've traditionally hired from. And I think what we'll be looking to build there is more bringing in people that are talented coders, but mostly do that on an individual basis and getting them embedded into the idea of doing this as part of a team and engaging with the research world. And it's going to be an interesting experiment as to how we bring on much more the collaboration and soft skills side of things to people that have more of the technical background.
Joe?
Yes, just thought I'd add from the having just come out of the PhD, what do I do with my life crisis myself? I think in the course of a PhD, at least in astrophysics, there was very little offered in terms of potential career paths other than the traditional academic postdoc route or industry. Lumped together as one thing. The notion of jobs in the middle, research adjacent jobs and research software engineering in particular, I really didn't know that was an option. And I think this probably comes down to something which will be mentioned more, which is the recognition of the role of RSEs in research in a lot of academic departments or groups. With more value placed on those kinds of roles and more visibility of the pathways into it, you would be able to get people at an earlier stage in their research career to say, actually, this is what I enjoy doing, and this is something I can do as a job, rather than being fed up with the research life and looking for something that uses that skill set in a more tangible way.
Thank you. Yeah, and the next question would be, okay, what else do RSEs need then? So apart from training and foundational skills, what kind of support is needed to help cultivate and support RSEs and their careers? So Simon, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, so I think it kind of falls into 2 different camps in the support. But before I get to that, I think I want to echo what some of the other panelists have been saying about soft skills, project management, people management. expectation management. It's all got management at the end of it. Those are things that we see in the RSE survey. They make up the vast majority of the skills that people are asking to be taught, and it's generally because they're not really taught very well within universities. You mainly throw it into a project, and you have to learn these skills. So I think they are a vital aspect of the other support that RSEs need. But then to answer the question more directly, I think there is a policy side to this foundation. So we need to see the career paths within universities. We are winning the battle for recognition, but we're not there yet. So we need researchers to view RSEs as being another vital role within their research groups, and to foster those collaborations that occur when you bring those people in, because ultimately there wouldn't be RSEs if there wasn't a massive demand for software skills in academia. On the other side of it, I think one thing that we've been lacking until recently, the Society of RSE set up, and that is a mentorship. So as you've just finished your PhD or just come out of your university, you start your RSE role, you don't have anybody to turn to really to ask questions about how to deal with problems that come up. And having a mentor there, somebody with a lot more experience, is a really important aspect to ensuring that RSEs stay in the career for a long time and develop their skills during that time.
Gabriella.
Yes, I just wanted to add that sort of also linking to what Simon just said, that also internally, one of the things that we're trying to do, developing in parallel to our educational programs, more experiential and exposure sort of learning opportunities. And under the exposure is where we have all our community, as we have, for example, a software development community internally, where software developers, and individuals that are, RSEs possibly as well, although we might not use that term internally, have a forum where they can exchange ideas, organize events that are dedicated on topics that are of particular interest to them. We can draw external speakers. So that idea of peer-to-peer learning as well. So mentoring, yes, coaching as well, shadowing initiative, and also these communities where that becomes sort of an, natural forum where questions can be asked outside of the, their direct teams, more of a company-wide type of activity.
Yeah, Sarah, you want to say something?
I think this is something that Anna might be able to chip in on as well, about something that we might need to support RSEs beyond just that sort of skills training, is that sense of community and identity, even like having the support networks and mentorship does make a huge difference, particularly if, like me, you came from a research background. I mean, I'm not sure if this is everyone's experience, but in my case, I'd wanted to be a physicist since I was 14 until last year. And it has been very pleasant to find that I'm not thinking of myself anymore as a failed academic, but as an RSE. And that is something that has this community, and, coming to these sort of events has definitely helped that. And I think that's something that maybe we need to be aware of with new RSEs, that they're going through a big careers transition might be difficult, and having that sense of community and being encouraged to reach out to other RSEs and take part in mentorship programs can really help there.
Yeah, that's an important point. And yeah, I think a lot of RSEs can sympathize with this feeling of feeling like a failed academic. I very much can. Jonathan, from an RSE leader's perspective, do you have something to say there?
No, I think this whole area, I can just echo what previous people have said, really. It's one of the benefits of being in a larger group, that we can do a lot more, providing that sense of support community directly for the team. I'm very glad to hear that Sarah has found that. I think it's much harder for people that are embedded RSEs in research groups, where certainly the regional and national community can help once they realize there are other people out there. But I think it's something that those of us that are in groups very much wanting to provide mentorship and a community locally to our institutions as well. So we're trying to provide associate membership for RSEs elsewhere in UCL that aren't part of the central group, so they can still be part of our community, even if they're not directly paid by us.
Yeah, that's a great system. Anne.
I'll kind of jump in here to build off of things that Sarah and Jonathan are saying, because when we think about, what does building communities within the RSE role in this kind of emergent field look like, it's interesting to think about how COVID has changed this, and also specifically online forums for connection. Because something that I've seen is how much the RSE role in the RSE community is very much, embedded across different institutions, also across different levels of, I guess, the research hierarchy, which means that people were able to come together online in a way that they weren't necessarily able to before, let alone discovered that RSE roles kind of existed, for example, all across the UK. So a question that I have, and I wonder when it comes to building community, especially because the Turing Way is something that is very much a kind of online centric community where they're kind of in-person hubs, but there are definitely remote connections made, and that's the strength of the project, is in this kind of return, especially back to sort of in-person events or in-person conferencing. What does that mean for building community within the RSE role when the past couple of years of the pandemic has really led to, one, of course, a lot of overwork, but also a different type of community building that was much more perhaps horizontal than it was previously.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question following up from the embedded RSE point that Jonathan raised. Following from this whole discussion that there has been over the past 10 years about building the RSE job title and RSE funding opportunities and RSE career paths, you sometimes feel it's very much focused around central RSE. So how can we work towards better career opportunities for embedded RSEs? So for people who are in a research group and who like their research group and who do not have a desire whatsoever to support other researchers in their career, but want to contribute to their own research field and stay in that group, but not go from one postdoc position to the next. So are there any things that we can do or that somebody can do to help them, to support them? Does anybody have a thought on that, Simon?
So I think it's interesting what Sarah was saying about being a field physicist. I'm a field physicist too, and I think what we tend to do is go, well, we're not following this traditional career path. So you start assuming that basically that you've wasted that time in a PhD, but what you discover as an RSE is that actually what you've done is you've got really good coding skills combined with a really good understanding of research, and you're completely saleable. And obviously the RSE growth in the community has been huge because those two skills together are very rare. So when we started the campaign, I thought we'd spend a lot of time traveling around HR departments in different universities trying to convince them of the saleability of these skills and the necessity to put an RSE career path into place. And that's still something we need to do. But what actually happened instead was we saw the growth of RSE groups, as Jonathan was saying, starting off in UCL in 2013. And those groups grew really quickly because they focused demand for this saleable skill set into a single group. And what I'm seeing is, obviously, we've done very well with RSE groups in the recognition of getting, and we've got career progression. I mean, some of the biggest groups are over 40 people now, so we have all manners of different specialisms, all focused in these single groups. But what we need to do is just push more of that into the central policies of the university. So they've seen that it works, they've seen that there's a demand, they've seen that there is a career progression, and now it's just a continuing battle with university HR departments, which is a difficult battle, to get them to pick up on this already successful model and make sure it's universally available throughout the university.
Jonathan, do you want to add something?
Yeah, and I think there's several parts of that. One thing that we're doing, and hopefully we'll be publishing later this year, is both the job description structure across all levels, going all the way from sort of just out of undergraduate through to professorial level RSE and what that looks like, and also a promotions pathway even within a professional services side of the university for what that looks like, kind of mirroring the promotions pathway that academics get. So at least you're demonstrating that you can create this kind of career structure within a university that can parallel focus on research or focus on impact or focus on the education side of what universities do. You can focus on the software outputs that you're producing as part of a research team and justify a case to progress on that basis. I think you're always, as an embedded RSE, going to be slightly more restricted in some ways than in a central group, because if you're in a larger group, the risk is amortized over the size of the group. And it's a similar problem that postdocs face in a career pathway, in that there are limited permanent opportunities available, because if you're in a small group or a single person, your next job is always dependent on getting the next grant. If you're on a group of 30, 40 people, actually, we've got 100 grants that we're doing at any given time. So if one fails or succeeds, it doesn't make an awful lot of difference in the big picture. And so there's always going to be a sense of, when you're part of a larger grouping, you can spread that risk a lot more easily than you can when you're embedded. The same for all academics. The risks of having to move on or change pathway are higher. But I think even as a central group helping embedded groups, we can still provide a fallback option to say that if this embedded group folds because they don't get the continued research funding, there are other opportunities within the university that you can move to, and there's a recognized career path within the university for you to move sideways, rather than, oh, job's over, have to leave.
Joe.
I think the question ties in a little bit more to a broader cultural change that could, and is starting to happen in research, at least in my experience in one academic department, but I think things are changing. But there is definitely a sense that it's somewhat self-selecting, and that your mentors while you're doing a PhD or so on are the people who chose a traditional academic pathway. And so that is very much what's encouraged. I was constantly told as a PhD student that there were not enough postdocs for the number of PhDs who were being trained up, but I wasn't often offered tangible alternatives that seemed appealing. And there are a lot of research adjacent jobs and lots of things that a PhD in a scientific subject equips you extremely well for, and that there are many opportunities to train in. But if those students are only encouraged to do things that will contribute to papers and conference presentations and their thesis, then you don't have the time to indulge in the training that you would need for lots of these other really valuable roles. So I think it's a broader cultural shift. I don't have answers as to how we go about doing that, but I think it ties into, it would improve a lot of academia adjacent career pathways.
Thank you. So for embedded and central RSEs, what comes after senior RSE or principal RSE, or however it is called in your institution? So if you do not want to become RSE leader or head of RSE, what is the next step? Jonathan, I have you down for this question.
Yeah, so that's again something we've been working on the new career framework we're developing, is to actually have a pathway that doesn't require taking on line management or sort of more pure project management, portfolio management type juggling that my role basically deals with day to day, and can actually focus on the technical side, I guess analogous to going down the software engineer architect kind of route in industry, where you are responsible for overseeing the larger projects, the more complicated technical decisions, having an understanding of a broad technical portfolio to make those kind of design calls, leading development on the more complicated projects and that kind of thing, and actually recognizing that skill set all the way up the career ladder. So I think this is definitely rarer. The roles are rarer, certainly generally within academia. It's slightly harder within industry too, I think, to some degree. Managerial roles are always easier to evidence what you're doing. This is the number of people I manage, so clearly I'm due a promotion. Evidencing technical ability and contributions takes a bit more thought and working up a case, but we're very keen to give that a parity of esteem within the group.
Thank you. So I am seeing that some people are asking about industry options and so in Slido as well. So I'll ask the next question because it kind of ties into that as well. So we are currently seeing lots of Rsds and also even academics who are in the computational area moving to industry, because industry offers much higher salaries. Industry through the pandemic has dropped the requirement to be in the office. So all of the flexible working that we could at the universities could say, oh, this is what we can offer, is no longer an advantage that we have. So how can we retain RSEs in academia? Or do we have to accept that doing RSE is a transit station on the career path of most RSEs, similar to postdoc positions? And if we accept this, how could the acceptance of this mindset for a central RSE group change how the team is run? Mark, I haven't heard from you for a while. Do you have an opinion on this?
Yeah, so I guess from my point of view, working at an institute and previously working at a Diamond Light Source, so a large facility, we always had the bonus of, you have massive technological bits of kit that people can play with. And that's always a draw for people who've got a science interest. So even though they could get a better salary elsewhere, they wouldn't get to play with the particle accelerator, or they wouldn't get to play with the equipment that we've got here. And that is a draw. It's not, as you know, it's not a huge draw, but it is still a draw, and there's still some that still offsets some of these things. How you push that further, I honestly don't know, because I completely agree. Work from home, these sorts of things, the playing field has been leveled. I think it's very much about the research element of the research software engineer, and it's keeping the person involved to a certain level with the research elements so that they feel engaged with the work they're doing, not just doing yet another project as a part of a bigger process. I appreciate you still get that in some industry as well, but I think most people are in this because of the research that's going on behind the scenes that they're interested in. So that would be where I would try and highlight things. But I think it's a very tricky situation. Recruitment isn't easy.
Yeah, thank you. Simon, I think you had your hand up.
I think one of the really curious things about the research community in general is, we're in the business of pushing the boundaries of human understanding, trying to think the unthinkable, all these sort of things. And then when it comes to lots of questions, we're terrible binary thinkers. It's like, are you going to have a research career path, or are you going to have an RSE career path? Because make that decision, you can never turn it around. It's just made for life. And it's the same with looking at industry, and they say, well, you can stay in academia, or you can move to industry. You can't come back. But what we need is a much more fluid career pathway for RSEs. We should be able to try out the research career path. We should be able to work as being an RSE. We should go to industry and come back. And all of those skills are going to make you much better in whatever job you end up being in. The problem is that within research, within academia, the way that we evaluate success is so focused on a tiny set of metrics that that as soon as you drop out of that research career pathway and stop writing papers, it'd be very difficult to get back in. And equally with industry, you move out to industry, you're not writing papers, or you don't have this sort of history in a university. So I think what we want to be pushing is these more flexible career paths where people can dip into different careers, try them out, and not just kill any chance of promotion in their chosen and final career.
Yeah. And
something that I'll add here is very much how, well, two things. One is that very much on the Turing Institute side of things, we have a team that's full of community managers, research application managers, project managers. It's very much an experiment in what research infrastructure looks like in real time. And there are people coming from industry, including myself in a lot of ways, though I have a background in research. And a lot of the motivation coming over from the industry side of things is that we are in a moment of civic mistrust in the technology industry as we know it. And I think in the role, when you think about research software engineers, there's a lot of draw there when it comes to wanting to be a part of developing ethical technologies kind of at the ground level when it comes to research that I think is maybe underutilized as a recruiting mechanism. This is a way for you to kind of ethically be involved in a different type of technology, a different type of process. But then on the other side of things, it's very much that research infrastructure with that kind of wider recognition. I'd really love to emphasize the fact that with this kind of overlap of RSEs into many other different emerging types of roles like data stewards, etc. Maybe if you enjoy perhaps the human element, perhaps even more so than the coding element, for example, there are roles for you there as well. And there are in fact many other different roles emerging. So maybe as RSE grows in greater recognition, can also shed light on kind of all of these series of roles that have gotten recognition because RSE has become so much more institutionalized than other types of roles as well within research institutions.
Yes, Sarah, you can tell us from your perspective, what do you think about this? Why are you still in academia?
Yeah, this is something I find this kind of debate interesting, that the point is always, I could get paid so much more in industry. Money is not the only motivator. And I think there's actually been psychological studies that in a research environment, the kind of skills you want, the kind of people you want are not motivated by money. They're motivated by having interesting problems and nice colleagues. And that I feel is very much something I associate with that I probably could. At various points in my academic career, my path was not straight. I took a year out before my PhD. I had 6 months off before my postdoc. And I did apply to a bunch of technology jobs, and I went round, places that are just software development places and labs and all sorts of other jobs. I spent like 6 months working in a bar. I've done a lot of other things. And I don't just want to be a software developer in industry. It sounds dull. Yes, I could be paid an awful lot more, but I want to work with people who are excited about what they do. I want to work with the forefront of research. My enjoyment of university was always based on going around everyone else's labs and going, what are you doing? Can I learn this? And now I get to do that for my job, and it's brilliant. So don't expect that money is the only motivator, and remember that those other things, having that, you just want people whose values are aligned with the values of this job, which is not necessarily profit driven.
Gabriella.
I almost feel like I have to step in and defend industry. I'm just kidding. Actually, having been someone that has been in academia for the vast majority of her life, it was for me interesting to step out of my comfort zone and join industry. I have to say that personally, for the type of work that I do, it makes no difference to me whether I am in an academic environment or in an industry environment, because it's still training in the end. It's still a people's job, is still understanding what people do. What I would say, yes, of course, the first thing that comes to mind when you're thinking about industry is, we're going to pay you a lot more, so come and join us. But it's also true, that different personalities thrive in different environments. So for some people, the academic environment might suit them better. For example, we are also dropping this idea of working remotely. We're also going to go back to in-person. So in reality, I would say that the type of, the environments are not as dissimilar as you might think when it comes to research. We have, very interesting research problems as well. When you start thinking about clinical trials, you're thinking about much more regulated side, then it's different. But a lot of our early stage research, we're really facing the same type of issues and the same type of problems that academia is facing. And the way that we work, it is, very similar to your traditional research environment. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So on this industry question, so is there a way for academia to work better with industry so that they do not compete against each other for the same pool of RSEs? So is there a way that we can work with each other, like funded PhDs or whatever other possibilities there are? Jonathan? Do you have time to? Okay, let's go to Joe first. I think Jonathan is discussing with someone else.
Sure. I think definitely as Gabriella alluded to, and I think has been mentioned earlier about the fluidity of career paths. I think maybe the binary of academia and industry is not helpful here. That in fact there are lots of academia is an industry. There are industries within academia. There are lots of interesting problems to tackle in different kinds of institutes. that require similar skill sets. So I think certainly in my experience in astrophysics, industry was very much seen as you're a failure if you leave to work in whatever industry is, but it was never really specified what industry is. It seemed to be always assumed that you'd be working in a bank. And I don't think that's really applicable for, I mean, sure, there are jobs in finance, but that's not the only alternative. So I think maybe cultivating a better understanding of the breadth of career options. And as Sarah said, I think there are lots of motivators. Speaking in my group, so I work, while there's software engineers here, there's also mechanical engineers and electrical engineers, and speaking to them, I think there's perhaps a parallel with software, that a lot of things, when they're in an industry where you have to sell a product at the end, if the problem is too difficult or too much at the forefront of trying things that might not work, it's seen as not possible. Whereas in a research environment, you just try, and you try until it works. So in some ways, you do have that structure in itself gives you a different approach to the kind of work you can do. You can push boundaries because it doesn't matter if they fail or if they don't turn a profit. And certainly there's R&D in lots of industries that does that as well. Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure summing that up, but yes.
Thank you. I'm aware we have only 10 minutes left, and we neglected a bit the Slido question. So I'll skip over to those and just start at the bottom, at the top, not the bottom. So the first question on here is, I'm a bit skeptical of this boundary between Rses and software engineers. How the panelists are describing Rses sounds to me the same as a software engineer with good soft skills. Are there any thoughts? Mark?
Yeah, so I think for me, the big difference is that it's that research experience, because what I find most of my job, especially when I worked closer with the researchers previously, was in translating what they actually want, because they can't necessarily translate. And actually working with pure software engineers whose background has not been research, I find that that's the bit that they really struggle with, because they're not able to actually extract necessarily the key bits of information from the sort of the level of the scientific jargon and other things like this that come barreling at them with no real requirements in there. And that's what I think the research element really is. It's that translation thing. So you could well be right that soft skills, if that soft skills involves the ability to talk with people, understand and explain the problem, then yes, it's pretty much it. But yeah, I guess that's the R for me, at least.
Thank you. Simon, yeah.
So yeah, just building on what Mark said, really, I think, again, we shouldn't just say, oh, well, software engineers can't do RSE work. Of course they can. There's plenty of really skilled people out there who call themselves software engineers and would be wonderful RSEs. We're not saying that. But we're saying within an academic context, there's no such thing as a specification in all the projects we do. You don't get the requirements up front. What happens is you get a kind of general direction of travel, and then you get lots and lots and lots of iterations and changes. And it's quite difficult to come from a traditional software engineering background and try and deal with those constantly changing requirements. So I think one of the things the RSEs do, because they, as Mark said, understand the research philosophy, I guess, they understand that this is a continual process and that there won't be a requested product until probably the very end. And being able to deal with that rapidly changing circumstances is one of the real strengths of an RSE.
Sarah?
I think something else that is a difference between research and just normal software development is also in the actual code you write, because we're dealing with researchers. And I mean, the reason I'm thinking about this is because I have a cousin who's a software developer, and before my interview for this job, I chatted to him and showed him my code, and he laughed and said if he had coded like that, he would be fired. Because in his world, you are writing software to be the best, the most efficient, the fastest, the neatest. He is not allowed to write any comments in his code, because apparently that means your code is badly written, that it needs comments, because it's written for other software developers, whereas we are writing code for researchers, and we do a project, but then we hand over that project to the researchers and they need to be able to use it and interact with it. And the code you're writing is a form of communication with them. So it's not always about writing the best software or the fastest program or the neatest program. It's about writing a program that someone with a lot less experience and time can use and maybe edit and maybe change later and maybe pivot to a completely different grant if something falls through. And that is something that is, I feel, a very different style of coding.
Yeah, Joe.
Maybe this is a little tangential, but I think something that hasn't been mentioned in terms of the role of software engineering, traditional software engineering within research, in terms of where people get their skills from. So in terms of, I think this has been mentioned before, most self-taught kind of wild-grown Rsds are learning within a framework that doesn't necessarily provide them the formal training that they need in terms of, programming skills. My experience was that the majority of the programming skills I've picked up have been from other PhD students and postdocs who have worked in software engineering jobs before coming into academia. And they developed a skill set that nobody taught me, that was not present in the academic roles. But without those software engineers coming into academia, none of that, I wouldn't have picked up half of what I've needed and what I've learned. And those are the people I would turn to for technical expertise. So I think that's maybe an inverse of what we've been talking about, that the traditional software engineering feeding into academia is actually quite an important part, I think, of developing those skills.
And
I'll just tack on here, what type of community manager would I be without plugging the Turing way, saying that it very much emerged out of this need to have a shared place for best practices, not only for RSEs, but more broadly for open science and reproducible research. And so with, I think a lot of people looking for, those shared practices or, entry points from both industry or from the academy, having more places of learning and shared resources that people can, one, get involved with, but also improve over time as the roles are more and more solidified, as the kind of best practices, I think, are emerging out of it in many ways, are already sort of solidified in a lot of places. Finding more places to, I think, kind of create more official documentation for that, which is where the Turing Way as a project definitely came from, but is only building on over time.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are almost out of time. I could continue discussing with you for another hour at least. I'm also very, very sorry that we got through so few of the Slido questions, but I'm told that they will be answered separately, so I'll hand over to Selina in a moment. I just would like to ask the panel, is there anything urgent you wanted to mention at this topic that you didn't have the chance yet? No, okay, that's good. Phew. So thank you very much. That was all very, very interesting. And I don't believe we've solved anything today, but at least we had lots more food for thought. And I hope maybe given somebody some ideas or so. Thank you to the SSI also for organizing this. And Selina, I'll hand over to you now.
Hi, I just wanted to thank the panelists as well and Marion for doing a great job as a chair. And yeah, a big round of applause for everyone. Yeah, so about the Slido questions, we'll aim to answer them at some point. We'll circulate them to the panelists and hopefully some of the panelists will be happy to reply on Slido. And that's it for now. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon.